Morning, afternoon, evening, whatever it is, wherever you are. It is 5:24 for me. I'm in Colombia. Okay, we're going to talk about why the Soviet Union lost the Cold War. Most people get this wrong. It's a simple question, and at first glance, most people jump to a neat, dramatic answer. They say something like, well, one strong leader crushed the system, usually meaning Ronald Reagan. And that explanation is tempting. Tempting just means attractive, but too simple. But history doesn't really work that way. Instead of giving you a one-sentence answer, we're going to peel back the layers, which means remove layers slowly to reveal something complex underneath. Because the story is not about a single hero or a single mistake. The reason the Soviet Union lost the Cold War, it's about pressure, miscalculation, exhaustion, and decisions that slowly boxed the country into a corner. Now, boxed into a corner means leave someone with no good options. The country was boxed into a corner. One popular explanation begins with military pressure. During the final decades of the Cold War, the United States and allies, they dramatically ramped up military spending. Ramp up, meaning increase quickly and aggressively, to ramp up. And the Soviet Union, they tried to keep pace. They tried to match the speed or the level of the US and its allies, to keep pace. But there was a problem with that. The economic strength of the Western alliance, that dwarfed the Soviet economy. When we say dwarf, this means to be much larger or stronger than something else. The economic strength of the West dwarfed the Soviet economy. So while Western countries were spending single-digit percentages of their economies on defense, the Soviet system poured enormous portions, huge percentages of its national output into the military. This led to what we call economic exhaustion. Exhaustion is a state of being completely worn out, and this was economic exhaustion. For instance, their hospitals suffered. Consumer goods made in the Soviet Union, they disappeared. And living standards just stagnated at best. We can say that the country was burning the candle at both ends. That's an idiom, and it means trying to sustain at an unsustainable pace. The Soviet Union was burning the candle at both ends. Military pressure didn't stop just at spending. The Soviet Union was entangled in conflicts that bled resources. To bleed resources means to slowly drain money and manpower and energy, like the war in Afghanistan. That turned into what we call a quagmire. A quagmire is a situation that's difficult to escape and keeps getting worse. The war in Afghanistan turned into a quagmire. It was costly, unpopular, and there was no clear victory there. So instead of projecting strength, instead of showing strength, it actually exposed weakness. Expose is to make something visible that was hidden. And that war exposed the Soviets' weakness. We also had a problem with the human rights promise. International agreements included human rights commitments. Commitments are formal promises, if you like. And these promises, at first, they seemed harmless. After all, no one expected them to be enforced. Except activists. Activists across Eastern Europe began holding governments to account. To hold to account means to demand responsibility and explanations. And while the Soviet government didn't expect these promises to be enforced, activists did. They compared what was promised with what was delivered. And the contrast there was, well, impossible to ignore. This created what we call a moral crisis. Moral is related to right and wrong. And it was a moral crisis inside a system that claimed to present justice, but really looked like repression. Now, the Soviet Union wasn't just a country, it was an empire. Empires have one dangerous problem. When one part breaks free, others start asking, well, why not us? This is called contagion. Contagion is the rapid spread of ideas or actions from one place to another. Contagion. And demands for reform, they snowballed. Snowball just means they grew larger and faster all the time. They snowballed. Strikes, where people refused to work, strikes turned into movements, and protests eventually turned into political negotiations. And crucially, the Soviets didn't deploy tanks. The tanks weren't used, the military wasn't really used to suppress these movements, these calls for reform. And without force, you can say that control slipped through the government's fingers. Slip through your fingers, this means to lose something you once controlled. That decision not to use the tanks, that caused control to slip through the government's fingers. And then we had the economy, because in the end, it's money that matters. The Soviet system, the Soviet economic system, it relied on central planning. This means economic decisions are made by the government rather than the markets. And the Soviet economic system relied heavily on decisions made by the government. On paper, everything looked good. Production looked really impressive. But in reality, the numbers were fiction, not true. Factories just lied about their output. Managers of these factories, they lied about shortages of resources. And officials passed these lies upward until the entire system was built on bad data. This caused a massive misallocation. When we say misallocation, we mean resources being used in the wrong places. Food rotted. Imports skyrocketed. You can say they went through the roof. They were importing everything they needed instead of producing it. Productivity actually collapsed. And by the time the leaders of the Soviet Union realized just how big the problem was, the scale of the problem, it had already metastasized. This means it spread and became uncontrollable. We often use that metaphorically, metastasized. Then there was a paradox. A paradox is a situation that seems contradictory, but it's true. The most dangerous moment for a failing system is when it tries to reform. Attempts at openness in the Soviet Union, this just raised expectations. People wanted more and more. And attempts at restructuring, that revealed a massive amount of corruption. So instead of stabilizing the system, reforms that were promised and implemented, they pulled the rug out from under it. Pull the rug out means to remove support suddenly. So these reforms pulled the rug out from under it. And people began asking questions they'd never been allowed to ask before. Who are we? Why are we poor? And why are others freer? Once these questions are asked, there's no rewind button. To rewind means to go back to an earlier state. Leadership mattered, of course, but not in the heroic way people like to imagine. Key decisions were based on false assumptions, beliefs that are incorrect, but they're treated as facts, false assumptions. There was an expectation that their allies would remain loyal, that old institutions in the Soviet Union, they would disappear peacefully, and that history only moved in one direction. None of that turned out to be true. Meanwhile, other countries, they moved faster, they negotiated harder, and they used money as leverage. Leverage means to use an advantage to influence outcomes. Deals were struck, borders were settled, and systems were replaced before resistance could regroup. But the Soviet Union lost because, well, it wasn't one thing, it was everything at once. We saw all of these factors: military overreach, economic exhaustion, ideological collapse, imperial overstretch, and reforms that arrived too late and moved too fast. If you take away one of those factors, history could have been different, but together they made the collapse unavoidable. Okay, a few phrasal verbs you heard there. To ramp up is to increase rapidly. Keep pace, match speed or level. To bleed resources, slowly drain strength or money. To hold to account is to demand responsibility. Snowball, grow rapidly. To slip through your fingers is to lose control. And to pull the rug out, this is to remove support suddenly. Some of the key vocabulary: tempting, attractive but misleading. Exhaustion, this is extreme tiredness or depletion. A quagmire, this is a situation that is hard to escape, a quagmire. Commitment is a formal promise. Contagion, a rapid spread of ideas or actions. Misallocation, this is using resources badly. Misallocation. You heard to metastasize. This is to spread uncontrollably. A paradox? Something that seems contradictory, but it's true. And leverage? This is using advantage strategically. We had some idioms and sayings: to burn the candle at both ends. That just means to live unsustainably. To box someone into a corner. This is to leave no good options. And when there's no rewind button, this is no way to go back. There's no rewind button. And that's everything for today. Thank you for listening. This is Listen. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode. Until then, bye-bye for now.